Okay, so let's unpack this. We've dedicated deep dives to everything from rare earth minerals to exoplanet research. But today, the source material is something else entirely. It's intensely personal, but it's also universally structured.
It really is. We're not looking at a new research paper or an article today.
Right.
We are diving into a self-curated, self-paced, 15-week autodidactic syllabus, a study guide, really.
And it's a blueprint for a specific kind of learning. They call it analog, slow learning.
Hmm.
It demands you move completely off screen.
Which is a challenge in itself. And the subject is the Sicilian migration narrative. It traces the journey from Sicily, which they call by its ancient name Trinacria, all the way to a very specific destination.
Not New York.
No, not New York. The red brick streets of Ybor City, Tampa, Florida. And it focuses on that really critical period between the 1880s and the 1930s.
And the listener who shared this with us, their goal for us was to really pull out the most powerful nuggets, both intellectual and emotional. The mission here, the whole point of the syllabus, it's not about memorizing dates.
Not at all.
It's about getting so deep into the material that it becomes part of how you see yourself.
Yeah.
It's about grasping the why and the how of that immigrant experience.
And the creators, they have a specific term for this goal. They want the learner to achieve intellectual and emotional synthesis. The Sicilian word for it is sentimentu.
Sentimentu. What does that translate to, roughly?
It's this idea of wisdom that comes from deep feeling, from experience. It's not just absorbing information. It's letting it change you. And to do that, the course mandates a very specific tool.
A dedicated, high-quality paper notebook.
Exactly. A moleskine, a louche term, something that will last.
I find that so compelling, that resistance to digital. It has to be a physical object. The idea is that the ink, the paper, it literally embodies the time you've spent. You're creating a physical record of your own intellectual journey.
And your family's journey, in many cases, you're using what they call slow tech to connect with a history that moved, well, very slowly and with enormous difficulty.
And that analog requirement, it really sets the pace, doesn't it? They know life is busy, so they've structured the whole thing around what they call the rhythm of three.
It's a really thoughtful way to integrate this kind of deep study into a normal week without, getting burned out.
So walk us through that rhythm.
Okay, so it breaks the week down into clear phases. Monday and Tuesday are for consumption. That's when you do the reading, the research, you absorb the new facts.
The raw data.
The raw data. Then Wednesday and Thursday, you shift to digestion. This is the really critical part: reflection, synthesis, connecting the dots between what you've read and the emotional concepts the course introduces.
Okay, so facts first, then integration and feeling. What's the third part?
Friday and the weekend are for connection. This is where it becomes active. You apply the history to your own life, maybe your own family story, or you use that historical lens to look at something happening in the news today. It keeps it relevant.
I love that. And this whole 15-week journey is broken into 4 big thematic phases.
Precisely. Phase 1 is the departure, which is all about the Sicilian push factors.
Why they had to leave.
Exactly. Phase 2 is the red bricks of Ybor, focusing on the destination. Phase 3, culture and conflict, which gets into some really difficult questions about bias and community. And finally, creative synthesis, where all that work in the notebook becomes the final, tangible artifact.
All right, let's start where the journey started, Sicily, late 19th century. When we talk about Italian immigration, the story usually starts with the pull of America, the American dream.
Right, streets paved with gold.
Yeah, but this syllabus flips that completely. It spends the entire first phase detailing the severe push factors, the things that made staying in Sicily just an act of desperation.
And the foundation for this entire phase, the first 2 weeks, is one concept. The syllabus calls it miseria.
And this isn't just poverty.
No, it's so much more than that. Miseria implies this deep, relentless, inescapable suffering that's imposed by the system. It's a structural lack of options. It just defined life for almost every Sicilian peasant.
So how is this miseria baked into the system? Especially after Italy's unification, which was supposed to be this great liberation.
Well, it was enforced by the latifondo system, and this is absolutely critical. Legally, feudalism was gone, but in practice, these massive estates, the latifondi, were still owned by a handful of absentee barons. The peasant, the contadino, was basically a sharecropper.
So they were still tied to the land, still at the mercy of the landowner.
Completely. They're trapped in a cycle of debt. They'd have to borrow money just to buy seeds for planting. Then when the harvest came in, the owner took the lion's share, leaving the peasant with Well, with more debt, usually.
So no way to save, no way to buy even a tiny piece of land, no upward mobility at all.
Zero. The land was everything, but it was always, always out of reach.
And this reality, this brutal truth, is captured in the literature of the syllabus as you read this concept of verismo.
Verismo, it just means realism. This isn't some romantic novel. The syllabus points you to Giovanni Verga, his Sicilian stories. And these works are essential because they don't romanticize poverty at all. They show the daily grind, the desperation, the rigid social codes you have to follow just to survive.
And the political situation just made everything worse. Unification in 1861, which we're taught, was this great national triumph. For Sicilians, it was often a disaster.
A profound disappointment. In many ways, it was worse than being ruled by the Bourbons. The new government was in Rome, it was dominated by northern interests, and it just slammed the South with harsh policies.
Like what?
Heavy taxes, for one. They taxed everything, even the grain you needed to mill for bread. And crucially, mandatory military conscription.
Taking young men off the farms, that must have been devastating for families that were already on the edge.
It was catastrophic. For a family relying on manual labor, losing your strongest son for years was a death sentence. And all the tax money was flowing north to fund industrial projects that never, ever reached Sicily. It created this profound sense of alienation.
He didn't feel Italian.
They felt colonized. And this led to what's known as the brigandage wars in the South.
Right.
From the government's perspective in Rome, they were criminals, brigands. But from the peasants' perspective, this was a resistance. It was a brutal guerrilla war against taxes, against conscription, against this foreign rule.
And it just cemented that deep-seated Sicilian belief that the syllabus forces you to confront.
That the government is not your protector. It's a predator. The state is there to take your money and your sons, not to help you.
The level of economic desperation is just.
Hmm.
It's almost impossible for us to imagine. The syllabus points to a couple of specific examples that really crystallize what miseria meant. The sulfur mines, the Zollfare.
The sulfur mines were, they were industrial horror shows. Unbelievably dangerous, no ventilation. And the labor conditions were practically medieval.
And they used children, the Carusi.
The Carusi. Young boys, sometimes as young as 7 or 8 years old, used as pack mules, carrying these huge, heavy loads of sulfur ore on their backs up these narrow, boiling hot shafts for hours and hours.
Why children?
It was basically a form of debt bondage. A family would get so desperate they'd essentially sell their son's labor to a miner for a small advance payment, the prestito.
And the child then has to work to pay off a debt that they can never actually pay off.
Exactly. The debt just grows. The fact that a parent would be forced to make that choice tells you everything you need to know about the inescapable squeeze of miseria. Leaving Sicily wasn't just about opportunity. It was about saving your children.
And that context just perfectly sets up the next step. Week 3 shifts to the physical act of leaving, the voyage, and the emotional fuel for it, which the syllabus calls speranza.
Right. And the syllabus makes this really personal. It has you go to the online archives, Ellis Island or Castle Garden, and actually search for passenger manifests from your ancestral town.
So you're finding real names, real dates.
And you write them down in your notebook. You transform a statistic back into a person. Then you have to confront the reality of that journey in steerage class in the 1890s.
Which was it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was often deadly.
It was a nightmare. Thousands of people packed below the waterline for weeks. Minimal sanitation, bad food, no fresh air, disease just ripped through those holds. Typhus, cholera.
And the psychological toll of that, watching your family get sick, maybe die, on the ship, heading to a place you've never even seen a picture of.
And this is where that word speranza becomes so important. It's not just hope. It's a specific, desperate, radical kind of hope. The kind you need to bet your entire existence on a complete unknown.
And the assignment for this week is just brilliant.
It's to write a letter home from the middle of the Atlantic. You have to project courage and hope for the family back in Sicily, but you also have to, subtly hint at the horrors you're actually experiencing without causing them to panic.
It's an exercise meter emotional survival.
Yeah.
What do you say? What do you leave out?
Yeah. The ink in your notebook is literally capturing that tightrope walk.
So the culmination of this whole first phase in week 4 is this huge intellectual leap. Confronting, go to the unknown.
This is the core task of the whole section. The prompt is brutally direct. It asks you to write 500 words on what it would take for you today to leave everything. Your home, your language, your friends, your job. What's your breaking point?
That forces you to quantify it. It's so easy to look back and say, oh, they were brave. But this makes you ask, what would my own personal miseria look like? What would have to happen for me to get on that boat?
And that's the sentimentu in action. It's not just understanding the ancestor's fear, it's feeling it in your own gut. It's moving beyond they left for a better life to admitting they left because staying meant ruin. And those 500 words in your notebook, they become a bridge between your fear and their courage.
A perfect transition, then. Once you've grappled with the fear of leaving, you have to face the reality of arriving.
Exactly.
Phase 2, the red bricks of Ybor. This is the arrival. But it's not the America we usually picture. We're moving from the farms of Sicily to the hot, humid, industrial world of Ybor City, Tampa.
It's a massive shift, and the first question the syllabus asks is, why Tampa? Of all places, it's so far from the big Italian hubs in the Northeast.
And the answer is one specific industrial pull factor.
The cigar industry. A man named Vicente Martinez Ybor moved his whole operation from Key West to Tampa in the 1880s. He needed cheap land and, more importantly, a reliable source of labor.
So he created this huge economic engine from scratch.
Absolutely. And it pulled in immigrants from Cuba, from Spain, and crucially for our story, from Sicily. They came specifically for that factory work, trading the misery of the latifando for the routine of the factory floor.
But the environmental shock, I mean, week 5 really dives into this.
It must have been staggering. Sicily is mountainous, it's Mediterranean. Tampa is flat, swampy, humid scrubland. The syllabus prompts you to just imagine the sensory details. The smell of the ocean crossing finally ends, and it's replaced by the smell of stagnant water and the suffocating humidity.
And the heat, the mosquitoes, it's a completely alien landscape.
A total sensory overload, and you have to adapt immediately. And that adaptation was social, which leads to week 6 and the neighborhood architecture, the vicariato.
Right, the physical space of Ybor City became this laboratory for cultural survival. Syllabus talks about the architecture of the workers' homes, the casitas.
They were small, simple shotgun houses built close together to foster that community dependence.
And central to all of this was the front porch.
The front porch was everything. It wasn't a luxury, it was a social institution. It's where you escape the heat inside. It's where news was shared, where gossip was traded, where the social rules of the old country were maintained. It was the village square, just transplanted to Florida.
And these neighborhoods, these vicariato, they were really specific, weren't they? It wasn't just the Italian neighborhood.
No, it was much more granular than that. It was often divided by dialect or even by the specific town you came from in Sicily. The syllabus mentions an area called La Pachata, which was full of Sicilians from certain provinces. Your social network, your support system was hyperlocal.
That kind of dense community structure supported the whole economy of the city. Week 7 and 8 get into the cigar factory ecosystem and the concept of travagio.
Travagio. Hard, enduring labor. And what makes Ybor City so unique in American history is the immediate mixing of what they call the big 3 cultures.
Spanish, Cuban, and Sicilian.
Working side by side, rolling cigars from day one, it created this multilingual, multi-ethnic community almost overnight.
But the syllabus makes it clear that it wasn't a community of equals, at least not at first.
That's a really crucial point. There was a clear hierarchy in the factories. The highly skilled jobs, the rollers, the torcedores, and the selectors who graded the finished cigars, those were mostly held by the Spanish and the Cubans, who had generations of experience with tobacco.
So where did that leave the newly arrived Sicilians?
At the bottom. They were mostly agrarian workers, so they were given the lowest paying, most backbreaking jobs. They were the strippers. Their job was to prepare the tobacco leaves by removing the thick center stem over and over for 10 hours a day.
Low pay, high heat, repetitive work. But within that environment, something truly remarkable emerged. The lector, el lector.
This figure is so central to understanding the dignity of this community. The lector was the factory reader. The workers themselves, the strippers, the rollers, everyone, would pool a little bit of their own meager wages to hire one person.
To do what?
To read to them, out loud. For 8 to 10 hours a day, sitting on a platform high above the factory floor.
And what were they reading? This wasn't just like light entertainment, was it?
Far from it. This was a tradition that came from Cuba, and it was deeply educational and often very political. Yes, they read classics, Zola, Cervantes, Dante, but they also read the daily news from around the world, political essays, union pamphlets, and the works of anarchists and socialists.
Wait, so the workers were literally paying for their own education, their own political awakening, while they were doing this intense manual labor.
That's it exactly. And it just completely shatters our modern idea of unskilled labor. These were people engaged in a shared intellectual dialogue all day long. It created an incredibly informed, politically active working class.
And the reflection prompt for this is perfect. What would you want the lector to read to you today? If you were stuck in a 10-hour manual job, what text would sustain your mind?
It forces you to recognize the intellectual life that can exist in any kind of work. It's a direct challenge to how we dismiss manual labor as thoughtless.
And this whole environment, this commitment to travagyu, it leads to the key survival skill they identify in week 8.
L'arte di arrangiarsi.
The art of making do.
It's more than just making do. It's the Sicilian genius for improvisation, for finding a creative solution when you have no resources. It's relying on your wits and your cunning because you have no money, no political power, and no safety net.
So it's not just getting by, it's an art form.
It is. Arrangiarsi is what you do to survive miseria. In the factory, it was finding a way to work faster. In the home, it was stretching a meal to feed 2 more people. It's the ingenuity that, honed for centuries in Sicily, made survival in a Tampa factory possible.
So phase 3, this is where it gets really complex. We're diving into identity, survival structures, and confronting the really hard history of bias in the American South.
Right. The immigrants have survived the journey, they've found work, now they have to build something lasting to protect themselves, and the foundation of that is fratellanza.
Brotherhood, community solidarity. And week 9 is all about the mutual aid societies.
Exactly. This was the response to being abandoned by the state and exploited by the factory owners. They built their own safety nets. We're talking about organizations like l'Unione Italiana, the Italian club.
And this was way more than just a social club.
Oh, it was a cradle-to-grave support system. They built their own hospital, they had their own cemetery, they provided medical care for the whole family, burial funds, all paid for by the members' dues. In a time before Social Security or health care, this was it. This was the only thing standing between a family and total ruin if someone got sick.
And that necessity, it fueled the radical politics of Ybor, didn't it?
Absolutely. The lessons from the lector, the daily reality of their lives, it all fed into the socialist and anarchist ideas that were the bedrock of these mutual aid societies. Fratellanza was the practical application of that political solidarity.
But that solidarity was always under threat. Which brings us to week 10. Conflict, injustice, and this word, sustu.
Sustu. It's a powerful word. It means a kind of deep anxiety or restlessness that's caused by injustice, a profound agitation. And the syllabus has you apply that feeling directly to the big labor conflicts, the strikes of 1910 and 1920.
And these were not peaceful disagreements. This was about basic human rights.
It was. And the response from the factory owners and the city's elite was brutal. The syllabus talks about the vigilantes and the so-called Citizens Committee, basically the wealthy businessmen of Tampa who were organized to break the strikes through violence and intimidation.
And the syllabus doesn't shy away from the darkest outcome of this anti-Italian bias. It requires the learner to research the 1910 lynchings in Tampa.
And that is a very hard thing to do, especially if you're exploring this as part of your own heritage. This is the moment where that bias becomes lethal.
What was fueling it?
It was constant sensationalist journalism about organized crime, the Black Hand, La Mano Nera. They used the existence of the mafia to paint the entire Italian immigrant community as criminals, as dangerous.
And that created the justification for the violence.
Exactly. The lynchings of 1910 were a direct result of that climate of fear. And the syllabus asks a really tough question here. How does confronting this dark side of the story change your pride in your heritage? Does it diminish it? Or does it deepen your respect for what they endured?
That's a heavy question. And to ground the learner after that, week 11 shifts focus to the forces of stability in the community.
The matriarchs, faith, and cultural adaptation. The real strength of the community was so often with the women. The Beta Matri, the matriarch of the family, she held this quiet but immense power. She managed the money, she kept the traditions alive.
And Ybor City was different from Sicily. Women went to work.
They did. Thousands of Sicilian women worked in the cigar factories. This gave them a new kind of economic independence. And it fostered the Camari network, the godmothers, which was this powerful system of female support that existed alongside the formal male-led clubs.
And that mixing of cultures, you can see it and taste it in the food.
Food is the ultimate artifact of adaptation. The syllabus points out how Sicilian cuisine, which is all about seafood and crushed vegetables, had to adapt to what was available in Tampa and to the influence of their Cuban and Spanish neighbors.
Like the deviled crab.
The deviled crab is the perfect example. You have Sicilian ingenuity, using the local blue crab, but wrapping it in a spiced breading that's more Spanish in style. Or the Cuban sandwich, born on the factory lunch break. It's arrangiarsi and fratellanza on a plate.
And all of this leads to week 12. The syllabus calls this the core intellectual climb of the whole course, the critical bias check. And it requires umiltà.
Humility, honesty, a willingness to be wrong. This is where the course really challenges the easy modern stories we tell ourselves about assimilation. And the main focus is the in-between identity of Sicilians in the Jim Crow South.
They weren't considered white when they arrived. They were Dagos. They were treated as a separate, inferior race.
They were in this precarious middle ground, white adjacent, as some scholars call it. They weren't black, so they weren't subjected to the full brutality of Jim Crow segregation, but they were absolutely excluded from the privileges of being an established Anglo-American.
And the syllabus forces you to wrestle with that. How do you feel knowing your ancestors were excluded from whiteness? And how does that history change how you think about discussions of race and identity today?
And it doesn't stop there. It forces you to check two other major biases. First, the idea that assimilation is always good. The syllabus asks, what was lost? What dialects, what customs were erased in the rush to become American?
And the second is an economic bias.
Right. It challenges modern biases against unions or labor radicals. It forces you to see those movements through the eyes of a 1900s tobacco stripper. Could you really afford to be against the union when it was the only thing fighting for your medical care?
It requires that humility, that umiltà, to admit that a word like socialist might have just meant the neighbor who helped your family survive. And the last check is the immigrant standard. Do we judge historical immigrants by a different, softer standard than we judge immigrants today?
The whole section is designed to break down simple, self-congratulatory pride and replace it with something much more complicated and much more true.
So after 12 weeks of this intense reading and reflection and self-examination, the final phase is all about creative output. This is where that physical analog notebook really comes into its own.
The goal here is physical expression. It's about using fantasia, imagination, creativity to make the learning permanent. And week 13 is the big art assignment, a mixed media collage called The Layered Identity.
And the instructions are so specific, so tactile.
Oh, they really are. The syllabus insists you use physical materials that represent the journey. Tea-stained paper for old documents, actual dirt or scraps of fabric to represent the land and the labor, sketches of tobacco leaves, maps.
So you're physically building the history with your hands.
Exactly. You're connecting the learning to a sensory experience. And then week 14 is the final written piece, what the immigrant heart carries.
And this has to be handwritten.
Must be handwritten in the notebook. And it can't be an academic report. It has to be about your own emotional and intellectual growth. How did you change over these 14 weeks? It's the final expression of sentimentu.
And then the very last week, week 15, is the act of reading back.
Which might be the most profound part of the whole thing. The task is just to read your entire notebook from start to finish. And you're told to look for where your opinions changed, where you struggled, even how your handwriting might have changed.
You're witnessing your own evolution in your own ink. And the syllabus even tells you how to set up the very first page, the dedication page, to frame this whole journey.
Right. It anchors the whole project. You're supposed to draw the Trinacria, the three-legged symbol of Sicily, as a visual link to your roots.
It's this ancient mythological symbol.
It connects the whole migration story back to the isler's deep ancient past. And with that drawing, you're supposed to write a specific Sicilian proverb.
Quavi lingua passa umari.
He who has a tongue crosses the sea. It's about the power of communication, of perseverance, of speaking your truth.
And finally, the learner's vow.
Which is your intellectual contract with yourself. You commit to being honest, to being willing to be wrong, to facing the hard truths without flinching. It's the final act of umiltà before the journey is complete. The whole thing is about solidifying your radici, your roots. The notebook becomes the physical evidence of that exploration.
This whole syllabus is just such a profound model for how to turn history into something deeply personal. Let's just quickly recap that essential vocabulary that shapes the whole journey.
Okay. So the reason for leaving was miseria, that deep structural suffering of the latifondo system. And the journey itself was fueled by speranza, that radical, desperate hope.
Survival in Ybor City was made possible by l'arte di arrangiarsi, the art of making do, the genius for improvisation. And it was all held together by fratellanza brotherhood and mutual aid.
And the really hard intellectual work required umilta, humility, to confront bias and the painful parts of the history. The final creative output then connects fantasia with sentimentu, imagination with emotional wisdom, to solidify those radici, those roots.
And the biggest takeaway for me is the power of that slow tech, the simple paper notebook. The ink on the page becomes a physical record of your own intellectual growth. It's a testament to the idea that the past shouldn't just be viewed on a screen. It should be felt and struggled with and physically documented.
And the very last instruction in the syllabus is to sign and date your completed notebook to mark the end of the journey.
So we'll leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds on that idea of radici. If your own intellectual and emotional evolution, your moments of struggle, your breakthroughs, are all documented physically in ink, as an unchangeable record of how your opinion shifted, how does that physical evidence of your own growth change your responsibility now? Does seeing your evolution on paper fundamentally change who you are, and does it create an obligation to share or act on that hard-won knowledge?